I grew up in the Indian subcontinent at one point, not too distant past. About 800 languages were spoken in the subcontinent alive, and that's disappearing very, very rapidly. And sometimes it was such small enclave of places where this languages are spoken, they're dying off. And as Aaron mentioned, is that the kind of increasing need for homogeneity, both through cultural processes and economic processes, to kind of influence people to act in a more kind of a standardized format. That's kind of taking away some of this richness that exists in the human dimension of it. So that's the concern, and I think that also translates into the cultural homogeneity as well, because language, food, and music and expression, those are kind of the attached to the language of the people, and the kind of the vernaculars or specificity of some of the construction of the languages. So I think that part is really a kind of a move towards homogeneity and losing some of this really richness that exists in the human cultures around the world. So going into the kind of the species domain, and this more talking about the conservation and biodiversity piece, is that, if we in an ideal world, if we understand songs and song creation and vocalization as a maybe simplify it as a pure function of some sort of reproductive performance. So if that evolves over time and occurs naturally, that there's a kind of a natural selection that's attached to it. The singer that has the most complex song, or song that has different elements that might be attractive, and that creates reproductive success down the line. What happened with our intervention into this natural world, we kind of broken into this natural processes. Let's say, by the end of the whaling era, there were some species that 50, 60 individuals left. So we kind of purged some of the cultural evolution from some of the species, and some of the, especially the learned behavior. If you take out those dominant singers, that would then transmit to the next generation. If that individual is taken out of the population, that social evolution stops right there. And when our activity, our impact influences that directly, you're losing that quote unquote cultural richness in both biological vocalizations and through standardization and in human cultures.
in many ways, I mentioned before, like this idea of like sort of central themes and variation on that theme. One of the things that we see across all animal populations is sort of a trade-off. And it's a continuum, but on the two extremes, you can either have sounds that are what we call temporally patterned. These could be like, these could be beats. They could be sort of a staccato where it's not frequency information that's relevant necessarily so much as the timing and the time interval and the duration of those sounds. So whether it's like a pop, 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 or these crickets or fish or whatever, even beatboxing to a certain extent. It's all about the rhythm. On the other extreme are these tonal and harmonic sounds. These are the melodies and the harmonies that you're hearing that are very tonally rich. And we can hear modulation with upsweeps and downsweeps and harmonic content that we can extract quite a bit of information. And then you have stuff in the middle too, so there are midpoints. But to see that so many animals are evolving sounds along this continuum, yet there is so much in common across vocal diversity, I think for me is always really exciting. So, in many ways, in our lab group here, we study pretty much all acoustically active critters and ecosystems around the planet. And at a certain point, we're using similar software to do this analysis. The computer doesn't care what the sound looks like. It doesn't care what animal's producing it. We are using similar techniques to understand what these animals are saying. And so at its core, we're looking at sound. And for us as the biologists, what we bring into it is an understanding of where do these sounds come from? What's the broader context in which they're produced? How do they fit into their ecosystem? And how can we understand how these organisms are surviving and thriving in the habitats in which they live?